Hello, my name's Emily and I have an Etsy store called Yesterday's Stash. Today I want to show you a book that I have made with a Jane Austen theme. It's a junk journal. It's made from mostly all repurposed or reused materials. I have a thrift store close by that I am able to get just all sorts of interesting things, and I get a lot of inspiration from that store because I pick up things and I say I can use it for this or I can use it for that. So I've been collecting Jane Austen materials for just a very long time. I mean, I would say up to 30 years. I've had drawers full of Jane Austen things, and so I have been making books about her and her life, and I find her fascinating. I find her books fascinating. I found and so throughout this showing you my book today, I will also talk to you a little bit about her and her life, and also maybe point out some things about junk journals. Here is a list from Pam at the Paper Outpost of all different kinds of supplies for junk journals. And you know, when you go to a thrift store, old magazines, distress inks or markers or punches of different sorts, and different types of papers, old books, old receipts, old maps, and you name it. So what I have done throughout this, showing you this, I have looked through Pam at the Paper Outpost's list, which you can get that free on her website at the Paper Outpost, and I'll have that information in the description box below. The accent of the book is silver, so I have found this sheer silver ribbon that I have wrapped this around, but I also have taken a headband. I found a group of these at somewhere, and it was pink and blue and purple, so I thought I would put the purple with this. So the name of the book is going to be Follow Your Heart, and the story behind that is that neither Jane nor her sister ever married, and but Jane did get a proposal one time, and the next morning she chickened out and she said, I can't marry you. And someone said, why? And she said, I don't love him. That was a very brief. A lot of the books she writes are about just English country living during the Georgian, Edwardian, and maybe some of the Regency periods of English history. And I'm an Anglophile and a Jane Austen fan, so this book was just a great joy to put together. I did find some of this trim lace that I sewed together on a piece of fabric. Did the strip sewing, and that's what the side is made from, which it's about 3 inches. This is about 8.5, and this is about 6 and something. So the book has 4 signatures, and it doesn't do too much of a flap open, and it's actually made from wrapping paper. This is something that I found at TJ Maxx some time back, and it's a glitter. You can see the glitter. It's a glittery, probably wedding paper. In fact, I think I've used part of it for wrapping a wedding present at one time. But the interesting thing about this paper is also that it came with a set of napkins. And so I will be including some of these napkins with the book. In looking at the 4 signatures, I always try to have plenty of space in between the signatures. And each signature is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12 pages, which means that it's about 12 times if all of them are around 6 pages times 12 pages times 4, it's about 48 pages one-sided. So that's about how thick the book is. And in this part, the very beginning, in order not to cover up the wrapping paper, I actually took a piece of sheet protector and put that in there, and will stick in here. This book belongs to me, before sending it out. Again, the name of the book is Follow Your Heart, and I have not used any store-bought scrapbook pages in this, but I have used paper that I have bought from Etsy sellers. This particular paper here is so pretty, and is I'll have the Etsy sellers whose kits I have bought in the description box below. So to start the book out with, I used a piece of origami paper, made it into an envelope, put some lace around it, and then put some tags in here. And the paper, most all of the paper is a thicker paper. This is a craft paper, which is pretty thick, and I like to try to have as many places for journaling as possible. This is from an Etsy seller, the digital download of some of Jane Austen's quotes. And this is a beautiful piece of a package of stationery, a card that I use, the greeting card for that. So that's an example of how you can use different methods. And this particular table here, it says, according to Austen family lore, Jane Austen wrote stories on this table, set near a window for light on a daily basis while she lived at Chawton Cottage. And Chawton Cottage was where she and her mother and her sister lived towards the end of Jane's life. She was only 41 years old when she died, and she died in 1817. And in 1917, England made a commemorative, I think it was either a piece of, they put her name or her picture on a piece of their currency to remember her by. And then she was a lover of flowers. She did keep up her house a little bit. She had things that she kept some records for her parents' finances and spending. So I put a picture of that on the back side. I put a piece of I think this particular piece of wildflower comes from My Porch Prints, which is an Etsy seller. This is a piece of that basil, Bazil paper that I found at a thrift store, completely wrapped, never opened, and it was for sale for, I think, 50 sheets for 25 cents. I mean, for $1. And I did some lace. I used a plastic lace tablecloth to put a coffee stain on some of these papers. This is an interesting something about Jane Austen. It says, we all know that she was an accomplished novelist, but less well known is that she was also a talented stitcher, as at home holding a needle in her hand as she was writing. In an 1870 biography of his aunt, James Edward Austen Lee describes her as successful with everything that she attempted to do with her fingers and hands. So she did talk a lot. She wrote a lot of letters to her sister Cassandra, and she would always talk about the ribbon that she would bring for hair. She talked about when she would make purchases, and several times she mentioned things like hat making and ribbons and fabrics and such of this. Also, she was an avid reader. Her father had a library. He was actually a rector at Steventon, where she was born and lived the first 25 years of her life. And he had a library, and he actually had a boys' home. He would take in boys and teach them as a way to have an income, because there was a lot of children in the Austen family, and they were constantly, struggling financially. She only had one sister, and the other were five. I think it was 7 of them in the family, and the others were 5 boys. This is some wildflowers that she would talk about flowers in her letters to her sister. I did some stenciling here using aged mahogany, the distressing from Tim Holtz, and I received have received a lot of strips or small pieces of fabric from a man who was selling or getting rid of his wife's quilting materials, and so most of the pieces were small, and so I have been challenged to use the small pieces for different things. And so one of the things that I've used them for is trim across, the pockets. Now we have the Brock brothers. The Brock brothers were brothers that had an illustration business in, I guess it was London, and when her books were published later on, he and his brother were commissioned to do the artwork. And so you see these pictures a lot. Some of them, they're slightly different because it's 2 brothers, but they were aiming to do the same sort of illustrating, but there is a slight difference in it, and it is interesting to notice what those are. Here's another, so you could sort of see a difference in, not very much, but you can sort of see a difference in the 2 forms of illustration, which I think are by by the brothers. This is a quote from one of the 6 novels that she wrote that she is most famous for. One of them, and probably the first, or the one that she called her baby, was Pride and Prejudice, which had a different name to begin with. And she had some problems getting the books published, because back in those days, the books could only be written by a lady. And so women were not allowed to publish books. So she really didn't become famous until after she died, and maybe one of her books was famous. I think while she was alive, a regent king wanted her to sign a book, and it was the book of Emma. So Emma was one of the first books that she wrote that did become famous. These are some quotes from her books. Here's a quote from one of the letters that she wrote to her sister Cassandra. And here's more of the illustrations by the Brock brothers. Here it says, she completed formal schooling at age 12. They went to a town or city called Reading, where she and Cassandra both got education. But then and it was a little over a year, I think. And then they both got sick with, someone said, one writing was that they got typhoid fever. So they had to come home, and it says, she then found comfort in the family library where she began to read. And at home, they would read to each other at night around the fire in the evening. And Jane also wrote poems, and she wrote plays, and different things like that. And one of her books, Juvenilia, never did get printed until much, much later. And then Sandition is another one that was published. She didn't even finish writing that one. Here's a 4-leaf clover, and some lots of journaling spaces. But most of the paper for the journaling is thick, so that you can easily, you know, bear down on it and write. This is a little notebook that I put together and stuck up here. This is some of the beautiful calendar pages that I found that and cut up and used in here. And this is a special note to you, and it is it's a Bible verse from Jeremiah. Her father was a minister or a rector. Jane Austen's sister Cassandra was her biggest confidant. They were extremely close, and all throughout their lives they constantly wrote letters. In fact, Cassandra took care of her up until the day she passed away. Here's some more of that artwork, and I found a journal that had empty pages, but then every so many pages it had a quote from Jane Austen. It was a Jane Austen journal, and this was written, this is a quote from Emma in the book Emma. And this particular page here is where I used a napkin to do do a little Mod Podge on, or and put. So that's how I was able to use those napkins that went with it. Lots of books in her lives. Beautiful paper from Etsy sellers. Here is a set of old-timey weights, or sometimes people refer to this as a lawyer's signal, a symbol. Here is 7 interesting facts about Jane Austen. She was one of 8 children. She had 6 brothers and 1 sister. She had 1 younger brother, and the rest of them were older than her. This is from an Etsy seller who made a Jane Austen design, and that's Tsunami Rose. Both this and this are 2 different sets. This is where I made a big used Franken. Franken is where you take pieces and you zigzag them together, and I zigzagged lace and paper and fabric and trim and all sorts of things together on this piece of cardboard and made it into a big tag. And this is from a set of books that I found at thrift books, you know, and they look like this. They are of English country gardens, and they have all kinds of really neat pictures of homes and cottages, and just great for putting in junk journals. So I put a picture of a garden because there's several themes that you can use when you're putting together a Jane Austen book. Number 1, writing and books, libraries. Her family valued education, so you can put anything about education. She did travel to a couple of different places. She went and spent some time with her brother who lived in London. So there's some of that. She was also a gardener, and she was also, you know, as I said, she was a seamstress. And she actually sewed some of her brother's shirts, and just had a pretty interesting life. But you can't imagine how, you know, gifted. I can't imagine how gifted she must have been to be able to, you know, spend the first number of years of her life, and then they moved to Bath, and then they ended up at Charlton Place, where her brother, and Charlton Place is just north of Winchester, in England, and is it Bath? Maybe it's Bath that Charlton Place is there. This is some buttons that I sewed together on Aida cloth. I have a whole lot of Aida cloth cross stitching, and I made this little tag to stick in here. Lots of lace. I have lots of lace in my collection that I like to use, as well as the different fabric strips and the different Etsy sellers, papers. This is a greeting card that just has a lot of old lace and a brooch and some of the shoes that might have been worn back in that day, old roses, hats, all kinds of neat things that I repurposed that card for. And this is some of the fabric that came in the set of fabric swatches that I received. Here's a little charm of a woman's hat, like a gardening hat or hat that you would wear. This is several of her quotes written by an Etsy seller, sold by an Etsy seller, and another kit by an Etsy seller right through here. And then this is from Northanger Abbey. So I tried to have quotes from each of her books. This is a quote from Emma. This is from Sense and Sensibility. There's more of that calendar. And then when I was in London, I found a deck of cards that had all of the characters from Jane Austen's novels in it. And this is from William Elliot from the book Persuasion, and this is Georgina Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, and that's, of course, Mr. Darcy's sister. I'll put that in here. Lots of just tea. Tea drinking was big. This is a quote from Pride and Prejudice. This is Charlton House, where she lived the last several years of her life. And then towards the very end, she and Cassandra moved to Winchester so she could have a regular visit with her with her doctor. And there's a sign on a door in Winchester that shows where that apartment was. But Charlton House, let's see, most famous association is with Jane Austen, whose brother Edward inherited the property, and this was on his property, and his mother and her sister and his two sisters lived there in this home, which is now a museum in Charlton. Here's a quote. There could have been no two hearts so open, no tastes so similar, no feelings so in unison. And that's from Persuasion. Just had a great time making this book, putting it together, using old materials from the old home place, as well as materials to complement from bookstores. So been a huge joy to put this book together. It will be for sale in my Etsy store, which is called Yesterday's Stash, and that's a capital Y and a capital S, all one word, with in my Etsy shop. We look forward to talking to you another time, and thanks for coming along.